And welcome to another edition of In Focus. My name is Bob Perreault, and I'm very pleased to be joined on the line by local MPP Randy Hillier. Mr. Hillier, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure, Bob, and I do apologize for my being a little bit late. I was experiencing some technical difficulties in getting my batteries charged up. Been on the phone an awful lot, and the batteries were worn out.
Well, and that's the thing, and that's what I said when Angie and I were talking, because I know that you've been incredibly busy, and in what you're doing, and it's been difficult to get everyone on that we want to get on, but I've been noticing, and you've been sending along information about some of the things that you're doing for your constituents and for the people of Ontario, really, and it's really some very important work that you're doing. So I'm going to let you take the reins a bit here, sir, and tell me about some of the things that have really greatly concerned you about the provincial response to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Well, I think to start with, Bob, and I do appreciate the time that you've permitted to be on In Focus today. Back on March 13th, we shuttered the Ontario Legislature, and we adopted these emergency measures. And that was in large part due to the complete uncertainty and the mountain of uncertainty that we were facing, and knowing that the legislature was on a mandatory recess. So we passed a motion giving the executive, giving the premier authority during that recess. That was over 2 months ago, and we really haven't had any representative democracy since then. And I know the premier has been doing his best to deal with COVID, and we also know that we know a lot more today than we did back on March 13th when the emergency measures were adopted. But it's now 2 months later. We know a lot more, and I do believe it's time that we reopen our legislature, and that we have elected members taking part in the scope and breadth of these emergency measures and how they ought to continue. And I've been engaged with not only my constituents, which has been morning through night, trying to help them to deal with the many complications and the contradictions and the difficulties through this time. But it's and I do expect that we'll probably have an announcement within the next day or two of the legislature resuming next week. So that's I think important, and really make sure that we're doing things as well as we can during this. But there's been so much hardship and so much duress and so much fear from people in business, people in their personal lives, and where do you begin?
Well, that is true, and just before we move on to some of those other topics, when it comes to the legislature resuming sitting at Queen's Park, it has to be done responsibly, but at the same time, you're right, the government has to be held accountable, and this is what we're seeing at the federal level. Are you hoping to see something similar as to what they've done there?
Yeah, well, there's different things happening federally, and I think we're going to have similar, but maybe substantial improvements. That's my sense of our discussions with the government house leaders and other parties. And we're having those discussions every week. I think we'll see a greater participation level by provincial members. And we should keep in mind, during this whole time, and thankfully, we've still permitted and still have municipal elected councils operating and making decisions.
For sure.
And that's been really important, but we haven't allowed it to happen really at the provincial or the federal level.
And you have been in Queen's Park. You've been down there for a couple of key votes too, haven't you?
I have, but they've been we've not been able to actually have any question periods. We've not been allowed to have any debate on any substantive measures. it's just been a continuation of the emergency measures. So that ought to change next week. I'm hopeful that it does change. That's where all the discussions seem to be heading, and that all elected members, or all those who choose to be there, can help shape and guide and influence what these emergency measures look like, and instead of having it just in the hands of a very small group of people.
What is one of the chief concerns that you would like to bring up during a question period?
Well, I think there's two real key ones, and one is what's happening with our healthcare system right at the moment, and we know this was all to flatten the curve, and a marvelous job has been done, but we've now are in a situation where many people are either too fearful to seek medical attention, necessary medical attention, or they're prevented from getting medical attention. And we see that with the underutilization. Our hospitals now are operating at about 60% capacity. Many really necessary procedures have been postponed indefinitely, and there's a coming wave of problems when people don't get needed medical attention. Clearly, everybody recognizes, and many of us have recognized for a long time we've recognized the failings in our long-term care, and it's a tragedy to see that over 80% of the fatalities during this have been in long-term care. So those are a couple places that really need significant attention to, and the participation of all elected members. But I think there's one other element here, Bob, that isn't getting the required attention, and that is the level of fear and duress that people are facing, whether it's because their businesses and their livelihoods are threatened, and there's no future rate at the moment for many of those businesses in a closed state, and but also the prevention of social interactions has had a significant consequence on people's health. We've focused so much on safety, which was certainly absolutely required in those early uncertain days, but we've also limited what's good for people while trying to be safe. And it's things like we know that exercise and walking in the park and going to the gym are good for people. Good health is important, but it's not safe enough to do that. So I think we really need to examine what we're doing, how we're doing it, and make sure that what we're doing is good for people as well as safe.
What about the way that the province wants to reopen? Because I know that certain measures have been lifted today. Do you think that the measured approach that they're using is too cautious, just cautious enough, or maybe even not cautious enough? What's your opinion on that, Randy?
Well, I don't think we really know what their approach is yet, Bob. We know there's been a lot of talk, but we don't actually know what it means. And we're still getting all these contradictions. It's okay to go to Walmart or Costco to buy bedding plans, but it's not okay to go to Hillside Gardens. It's not safe enough to go there. It's safe enough to go to the beer store or the liquor store, but it's not safe enough to go for a walk in the park. All these contradictions are really making things very, very difficult. And I think one of the aspects that should be recognized as well. Especially in this area, I saw it in spades. It was so evident. People have been very respectful. They've been very responsible, very considerate during all these times. And many businesses took steps well before government enacted them to limit social distancing. And I think we need to have greater confidence in people's ability to be responsible and not just impose, a one-size-fit-all solution to Ontario. Because as we know, approximately 65% of all the cases have been in Toronto. It's a bigger problem there. And then we look at Kingston. There's no hospitalizations, no deaths whatsoever. So there are differences within the province, and I think we need to have the latitude and the confidence to allow greater influence at the local level on how we continue with these emergency measures.
Now, I should clarify, when you say walk in the park, you're referring to the provincial parks because, town-owned parks like Lower Reach and Stewart Park, they're open and people can walk through them. There's posted signs.
I had a case last week where somebody was in Conlon Park and was told that they have to leave or else they would be fined.
And that's the first I've heard of that, because it's my understanding that they can walk through, but if they stop, then that is not permitted.
Well, I'm not absolutely certain what the person was doing if they, but they were in the park.
No, and I hear you, Randy, absolutely, but it is the provincial parks and so on that,
conservation authorities, provincial parks, some municipalities have closed their boat launches, others have left them open. That's one of these other, that's part of the contradictions. It's also the complications. A great deal of my time has been on the phone with people just trying to understand what they're permitted to do or what their business is permitted to do.
What's the biggest one you're hearing about that?
Oh, it goes from everything from lawn care to roofs. If my roof is leaking, can I get it repaired? Can I get a new roof put on? The seasonal camps and the campgrounds were just a catastrophe dealing with the complications on returning snowbirds who only had, a park model home in a camp to live at. And these people were essentially left homeless for a period of time, but also being demanded to be quarantined. So the extent of the complications and the contradictions, I've never seen the likes of it before. And that's why, it's been from morning to night hearing what these problems are and then trying and often, but not always, successfully getting the government to bring clarification in on these emergency measures.
So if I'm understanding you correctly too, then we have to also take a look at it almost county by county as to what you can ease. Like one thing that I've heard about is allowing people to travel within their own medical system. Like, for example, if there was a campground that wanted to open within that system, they would be allowed to do so, but only if, and this is all just conjecture at this point, nobody has said anything, it's just a suggestion, only if people who were coming there were from, the area, right, so that they wouldn't be putting any additional burden on the medical system. Is that sort of along the lines?
Well, I don't know if there's any if this is going to add any pressure on our medical system. Like if
a bunch of people from Toronto come, that's what I mean. Like
I don't know. It's here's another one of these contradictions, Bob. Like I'm free to travel into the city every day to go to Costco or to commute to work, living outside of Perth, but it's too dangerous for somebody from the city to come to their cottage. Now, there's still both a transmission risk there, but one is permitted, one is not. And I would say to you that from what the evidence is revealing to us now, our healthcare system is not in any danger of being swamped. The capacity and the utilization rates are very diminished. Most of our family physicians are not taking. You're still not taking appointments. It's only over the phone. Our clinics are essentially all but closed. So there's certainly capacity there, but I think the point of it all is this should be discussed and debated in a rational manner in public where we can be accountable for what is decided at that time. But certainly I'm in favor. Kingston City Council passed a resolution 2 weeks ago asking the provincial government to recognize greater local influence in what these emergency measures look like. And I've fully supported that resolution and have encouraged the government to adopt that mindset.
Well, it'll be interesting to see if we get the opportunity to hear from the opposition in some sort of formal format at Queen's Park. What form that takes, we have yet to know. But Randy, as always, it's great to hear from you, and it's great to hear your thoughts. And one thing that always comes out is how concerned you are about your community. And before I let you go, I wanted to give you the opportunity to address those frontline workers and essential workers, those healthcare workers, those people working in grocery stores and retail who are providing us the necessities of life right now. What would you say to them?
Well, listen, I'm going to everybody, the whole community, and I say that with complete, certainty. Like, I have never seen such a level of regard, such a level of consideration, and such a display of work ethic and compassionate attitude as what we've seen in our communities. And it doesn't matter where you go. But I've talked to many people who work in long-term care, and that really has to be singled out in my view. Just they were in a terrible position from the get-go, and we didn't see the horrendous tragedies that we saw in Quebec and Montreal. People stood up and met this with all the resolve and all the compassion that could ever be expected. So a big thank you to everybody for just showing how great a community is that we live in.
Randy, thank you so much. I very much look forward to our next conversation, and I look forward to, once the legislature does resume in some form at Queen's Park, to you coming back and reporting and letting us know.
I think we'll hear in the next day or two that next week we'll be back in Queen's Park and have a more complete and full discussion on how we move forward.
And we'll get you to report back on that shortly after things get underway.
Certainly will.
Thank you very much, Randy. Take care and stay safe, my friend.
You as well. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. And there we go. It's Randy Hillier, who is the MPP for Lanark-Frontenac and Kingston, the independent MPP. I'm Bob Perreault. Stay safe and have a wonderful afternoon.